Well, thank you. I don't know what it means that I don't need any introduction. Hope we're not, I was going to say, hope I haven't caused too much trouble. My name is Kevin Howe. For those of you who do not know me, I now serve as the executive pastor, part of a new organizational structure that we've put together to support a new vision for this church that we have done discernment work on, and I'm excited to share that this morning with you. There are a couple of things that should be said first. I deeply love church, and church has been a part of my life for the fullness of it, before I ever realized the profound impact that it was having on my life and my walk of faith. So the things we talk about here, I'm very passionate about, because I'm passionate about doing it with you all. So this is not a vision that comes from on high, it comes from community, doing discernment, asking where God has positioned us with the gifts and graces and resources and people to dream a God-sized vision of what kind of impact we can have as people of faith here in Tulsa and beyond. So I'm really excited to share that. But we also need to name right now those who are not here and those who are struggling, those whose shoulders that we have leaned upon. I see a few names here that you all are being asked to pray for, and especially mindful of the absence of Jim McGee in our community as we all make sense of a new season without him in our midst. So before we go any further, if it's all right, I'd like to pray here for these folks. Holy One, we give thanks for this day. We know it's a gift from you, and that's something we should cherish deeply. We cherish the fact that we can gather after a season of pandemic. We don't take those things for granted. The fact that we can come together not as a mismatch of isolated individuals, but as a whole body of Christ. We know that just as a body feels each other's other parts' pain, we name the ways in which those around us carry pain and illness, anxiety, depression, personal struggles. And so we lift those people up right now, Lord, that even as you are present with us this day, that your presence would be made known in their lives in ways that they can connect to, that they would find a peace that passes any understanding of the situation. For now, we lift up especially the spirit of our beloved Jim McGee. We know he rests in your hands, but we ask that those of us who remain continue to grieve and celebrate the gift of having him in our lives as we continue to celebrate him in a memorial service this coming weekend. Lord, here we are considering the exciting possibilities for the future, casting forth a vision, and we know those things are doomed to fail lest you be involved. So bring your Spirit upon us, ignite us to be emissaries of your gospel, witnesses of your love here in our families and around the world. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. So, 'tis the season for football. And you know where this is going. Because the other thing you need to know about me is if I was foreclosable, Texas Christian University would own me. I went there twice for my undergraduate, but then went back to seminary at Bright Divinity School, which is affiliated with the denomination with which this congregation is affiliated, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And man, they're doing well. Go Frogs! We got some frogs in the house. Now, I can pick on you all because I know most seasons I'm going to get the same. But here's what I know about football. Not that I was good at playing it, but you have a really good season if you have a good game plan and you have everybody synced up together about how you want to envision moving through a season. Now, the seasons of football happen throughout these few months and it'll be over. But we, as a community of faith, also must cast vision, also must have a game plan. It's the work of discerning what our call is, what God is calling us to do, not only as individuals, but as a community of faith. So today I want to talk about the work that has happened to cast a new vision for this congregation, particularly over the next 5 years. What a game plan might look like to get some clarity around language, about our values, about our core practices, so that people who want to participate have a clear understanding of where we're going. Now, there's a lot of different good game plans. Apparently, TCU's is better. And I think that's contingent upon understanding who your players are, what their skill sets are. This is the same kind of work we do in our communal life together. Just as individuals, I believe, have calls in ministry, congregations have unique identities. God has positioned us with you all, these people in this place, in this context, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, next to McClure Elementary School. And we have to be paying attention to what's happening around us and saying, God, here we are. How can you use us together? So that why there are a lot of game plans and probably a lot of different places that this congregation could go. We'll say it's like, to mix metaphors, like going on vacation. Flagstaff would be a great place. Not now, it's cold. And Breckenridge would be great. And those are great places to go. But at some point, we need to agree on where it is that we're headed so we can say, those are great places, but we're going to Breckenridge, and we want you to help us figure out how to go there, how to do that most faithfully. And so, as I explain a vision that has already been cast by Pastor David earlier this year, I just want you to think about not only what's already happening and dream with me about how we can get there together, but also how you can be invested and involved. And I hope that by the end of this, I will have been able to give you some clear understanding of some opportunities coming up for volunteerism, for the ways in which, as we pour into new families, that you all who have been there can come back and be disciple makers, to be a part of that process for our children, our youth, our young families who are coming and joining us. So, let's dive into a game plan here. Does everybody have at least access to or close to someone who has these papers? When it's all said and done, these will be important. They're just a good snapshot for our mission, our vision, our values, our core practices. You'll see those core practices also noted as 8 marks of discipleship on the second page. Well, let's get into it. So our mission, and you've heard this a number of times from the pulpit, is to inspire one another to live and love like Jesus. Now, that's not exactly something that is particularly special about this congregation, but we want to be clear about a couple of things. That we are all on a journey of faith following Christ, and the hope is that we might, as we encounter worship, one another, the world around us, be sharpened to be more Christ-like in our living. So you'll see that reflected in our core value of active transformation. This isn't just come hear about God and what God's doing in the world. It's, come on, you've got a place and a thing to do in God's vision and imagination for what's happening in the world. So we're wanting active transformation, and we want to name that we're inspiring one another. The gift of community. The people who, despite a diversity of belief and opinion, in a rare place where we come together in our society right now, from all different walks, to say there's something more important than our partisan identity. It is to be people of God, to see each other as children of God, and to practice the love and hospitality we see in Christ Jesus. So we're inspiring one another to live and love like Jesus. And we have some values that undergird that work. You've heard these. Right now we're working on, through a sermon series called Inspire. You see where that comes from. But we're working through these core values, and we have 5 of them that we think that we are able to now clearly articulate. That's radical hospitality. We see it in the Gospels. We see the way that Jesus, not just hospitality, but in a radical way. What does it mean that someone would pick someone off the road, and say, you know what, I got their hotel and whatever expense. Or not just love our friends, but love our enemies. This is radical hospitality, and you all have paved a way for this value because of the way that this core group here has continued to practice hospitality. The things that we hear time and time again, we know this to be at the core of who we are, is the way that you have welcomed people into this space and made them feel comfortable. And we want to say that's true of us and also aspirational, because there's always a way we can make it more radical. And so we want to lean into that. We want on Sunday mornings our guest service experience to reflect that radical hospitality. We want a discipleship pathway for people who have just come to understand what a next step in getting invested in. A welcome is good, and it's a good feeling, but is there a place for people to go deeper and deeper in that connection, in that sense of warmth and connection? We want to make that an intentional part of what we're building here in the road ahead. So radical hospitality, I already spoke a little bit about active transformation, this idea that we acknowledge that we're on a journey pursuing spiritual growth and transformation, not only in our own lives, but in our community and in our relationship with Jesus. So the question that we want people to ask themselves is, what's my next step in following Jesus? You've heard that probably in the context of worship when Pastor David has made an invitation. Every day is an invitation to get up and follow Christ. What is yours to do today? What is yours to do in this season? And we'll talk a little bit about some core practices that might help us inform and think about the ways that we have an opportunity to mold our lives into more of a deeper relationship with Christ. Theological humility, I spoke about this from the pulpit last Sunday. This idea that we embrace the idea that we don't all see things the same way, and in fact, as the Apostle Paul said, we only see through a glass dimly. Now, someday we will have access to it all, we'll know it all. Great, but not right now, and we are humble about that. And we walk together in a world that practices the idolatry of polarization in such a way that we see one another's godliness, that divine spark within us. We are curious about the ways that other people have experienced God, the way that God has spoken into Kay's life may help inform me think about the way that God is working in my life. So we don't see the diversity as a deficit. We see it as iron sharpening iron, this idea that we grow together and we see more clearly as we wrestle and walk in love together. Enough said. I guess that was a sermon. I'll let you watch it online. Authentic community, we'll be hearing about that. David's preaching on it right now in the other room, so stick around. There's a second service. This is important because, again, this kind of piggybacks off of what I said about welcome. You can be in a community and still feel isolated. And it's important that we are always digging deeper into what it means to be an authentic community. There's a lot of ways, I think, for community to be authentic. But it comes from naming and knowing who we are, what we're striving toward, what we're moving towards, and a sense of vulnerability to show up and bring ourselves fully to the work that we are invested in collectively, to begin to say that we're in together on walking this journey of faith together through thick and thin. You all are walking with some others right now, and there are times of deep need, and we will all have that, and we get to celebrate together. We get to weep with those who are weeping and rejoice with those who are rejoicing, as the scriptures say, and that's a beautiful thing. Compassionate generosity. Now, this is something that we know is at the core of what Harvard Avenue Christian Church is about, and I want to thank you all as we are moving through this time of stewardship and thinking about the ways that we will give of ourselves and our resources in the years ahead, for entertaining the idea of a food pantry at McClure, for creating, even in this year, disbursements of over $95,000 to different partners and social services networks here and beyond our community. That kind of compassionate generosity we want to rear up, not only in those who already have resources, but those young families who are just learning how to put together their finances and their households, and to lead a way in teaching the younger families and the next generations about how to give in this Christ-like way. So I want to say thank you for the generosity that you have already exhibited, for the ways that you have made this a core value that we can feel confident is really a part of our DNA, and to challenge you Pastor David said that, those of us who are giving, he's asked us to consider, raising the stakes by 10%. So I'm in. I hope you'll join me if that's something that's feasible. But at any rate, please continue to discern how you give generously in the roadmap ahead. I hope what you'll see here in this vision is some clarity about why we need the resources and what we're doing with them. So there's a good sense of encouragement about what we're doing together and the impact that's having. So 5 core values. The staff has now had a retreat around these. Ask them, they get a pop quiz. If they don't know, let me know. Radical hospitality, active transformation, theological humility, authentic community, compassionate generosity. Then we have this vision. Now, this vision came about, here's a background story. There was a pandemic. Wow. Okay. And there was a lot that we have grieved and continue to grieve as a result of a particularly heavy season of COVID-19. What that meant for our community is that we hired on a new lead pastor, and his first day at the pulpit, the attendance was 0. And he had what I have right here, which is a red light that he was looking at in a camera. Now, when I look at that red light, I knew who I was talking to. I had an imagination for that. And this poor guy, David, he didn't have a clue. So there was a lot going on in that moment. And because of your compassionate generosity, we were able to move from, just audio recordings to live stream to these things that now are a part of who we are in terms of our sharing of what we're doing here as a community. And so I'm grateful in some ways for the outcomes that were positive that came out of a very difficult season. One of those outcomes was, hey, we've got this space. Maybe we should go to God and ask, what's ours to do as we think about what's happening right now and what will happen some glorious day when we can all gather again. And that started a visioning process. There was a visioning team selected that began to ask initial questions. Then we found it necessary that we would get on some consultants. The Unstuck group is a large consulting group that works with traditions of the church all across the board and has done really great work to help congregations and denominations clarify vision. And not that we're necessarily stuck, but this opportunity to say, what's next? And so we worked with them through February, March, and April. And as we left that, we had a very clear picture of where we're going to vacation, so to speak. We had good conversations with folks in this group, with our young families, with our youth, with people inside and outside of this community to say, where, God, are you calling us as a community? And with your help, what is a God-sized vision of how we can make an impact for you? That was our prayer. And what I'm about to share comes out of that. Now, I want to say one more thing, which is oftentimes we talk about SMART goals, a strategic or specific, measurable, attainable. There's one other it's in the church. I don't necessarily know. A little theological humility. I don't think that God cares about how TCU's football team is going to do. I care deeply about that. But I do believe that God cares very deeply about what Christ's church is doing in the world. And so we have to add on to our goals and the things that you hear here. If you say gulp, then we say yes, because it's doomed to fail, lest we have good plans and measurable goals and metrics and things, which we will continue to develop, but we also need to call upon God to do God's part. So we want to be a multi-generational church that is focused on reaching the next generation. You all have kids, grandkids, folks who maybe have one foot already outside of the church, and we want to say, we want you here. We want to work on targeting you all in such a way that you feel like this is your church, and we want to come around side you and walk this journey of faith as you lean more deeply into what it means to be a follower of Christ and to nurture your families in the ways that our families, many of us, had nurtured us in faith. So what does that look like? We want to be a place where people are reached with the good news of Jesus Christ. We want a place where everyone is taking that next step in following Jesus, active transformation, where families of all shapes and sizes flourish. We'll talk a little bit more about what it means for a family to flourish. But we know this, there are a lot of families that aren't flourishing, and I think that Jesus makes life better, and we want others to know that. Where people have known Jesus their whole lives, maybe that's some of us, are circling back around and making disciples of that next generation. You all know where you can step in to our children's programming, our youth programming, our young families as mentors of people who are also young business owners and leaders in our community, to walk alongside them and show them what it means to do that as a follower of Christ. And then to make a compassionate impact in our city through courageous compassion. So, here's what that looks like by some numbers, because we've got some business folks in here, some analytical people, and we need some metrics. We need to know, how will we know that we're going to Breckenridge? How do we know that we're really living into this? Well, in the next 5 years' time, here's some things that we hope to achieve. That we would see 1,000 people, starting with us, taking that next step in following Christ with Harvard Avenue Christian Church in the next 5 years. Now, those steps may include lots of different things. Joining the church, getting baptized, starting into Bible study. The point is, what we track is not landing points, but movement in people's lives, right? That active transformation. We want 750 people attending our Sunday morning services. Now, let me tell you what that looks like. Right now, we're probably back to pre-pandemic levels, which is an unheard of thing for many congregations right now. We're seeing about 400 to 425 between two services on any given morning. We know what it looks like to have 750. That's a Christmas Eve kind of season. The Creaster, Christmas and Easter. And that requires, some creative thinking about more services and making more space. So what I want to say about this vision, and I just want to leave it here at now, it's another gulp. If we start seeing 750 people in worship, then we're going to need to think about what that means for all the structures and supports that undergird this vision. We want 60 life groups meeting in locations all over our city. Let me tell you about life groups. You all represent a consistent and beautiful group of people, a large group that also I know has small breakouts and opportunities to go deeper together. And that's a beautiful thing. We want that for young families, everybody. But what we know is that's not always available, accessible on a Sunday morning. And so these life groups represent an opportunity for us to be intentional about gathering people together in small groups and having those meet all over the city, all over the time. Maybe it's Tuesday morning, maybe it's Friday night, so be it. So we may not see the impact that we see, on a Sunday morning when everybody's gathered here, but the truth is, even with, we had at one point before the pandemic 7 Sunday school classes, and we were already out of classrooms. So we really want to disperse the community to be doing that intimate gathering, to growing together, many places, many locations, to meet people where they are at, so that we can continue to promote the idea that Jesus wants us to do this thing together as a body and go deeper together. And so that's what the intention of life groups is. Right now we have 16. We've wrestled right now with getting those started, capturing places and opportunities for people together, and finding the right chemistry. I've been Match.com and a bad one, to start with. But we're working on getting, on our website, an opportunity where people can directly interface with group leaders to see when these groups are meeting and what they're about. So what I want to say is, this is one of those things in our game plan and as the football team that we're grinding out and we're going to learn about. And thank you for the patience as we do that. I'm really grateful also that it's not just about these life groups. Those life groups represent just one aspect of how we gather as community. This Challengers Group's a perfect example of that. We're starting a Bible study kind of pilot next week up in 218 for those who either don't make it to this group on time or don't find a fit for whatever reason. We want to make sure that there are multiple opportunities for people to engage together as people of faith. That's the primary reason. And what we're saying is we think those life groups have a lot of potential, and we're going to lean into that. We want to train 300 people, at least, to share about their faith. Now, I know sometimes that feels scary. And short of getting up on the chancel space and being vulnerable in that way, the truth is I'm not the only preacher in this room, because as people who live and love like Jesus, we're always asked to share about our faith through our actions, through our words, through our kindness, through our love of others, radical hospitality. And so what we want to do, though, is to make it, with the right training and workshops, really lean into this idea of helping people understand how they can talk about their faith and engage in faith in a world that sometimes that really seems hard to do, especially for our young families who have these beautiful stories of how they've come to be a part of this community. To be able to help people, I'm thinking about Stand in the Gap, where they talk about God sightings, to train us to think deeply about where have you seen God working in your life? Because our testimony answers the question, is God still alive and active in this world? Not just in a book that was written a long time ago. But if we believe that God is loose and doing amazing things in the world, we need to train people to look for that and to be able to share that. Another sermon for another time. 25,000 acts of kindness. Actually, I'm going to start with the 250,000 annually supporting organizations. You heard me say we've already given over $90,000 this year as a community of faith to various partners and institutions. I look forward to sharing the breakout of that with you at a later date. We had a strong week of compassion offering, which is a denominationally connected institution that works with refugee resettlement and disaster, helping after disasters. What's the word? Relief. Relief's a good word for it. Thank you, Kim. And so we think that by year 5, that because we're talking about giving compassionately, this compassionate generosity, this may be one of the least gulpy of the things that we're aiming after. But 25,000 acts of compassion, this is what I know from my previous role as community pastor, which is this, that we're not just trying to give money to institutions and make that kind of impact. We have a responsibility as people trying to live and love like Jesus to be outreachers. We are trying to train people, ourselves namely, how to respond in compassionate generosity to the places we think God is speaking into the brokenness of this world. And so many of the folks in this room, I know, are not just giving to our outreach here and the institutions that we support, but are going out and doing that work. We want young families and youth and children to have a good foundation for what it means to be Christ's hands and feet in the world. So 25,000 acts of compassion can seem very flippant, but at the same time, it gives us something very specific that we're trying to achieve. We want this to be dispersed into people's lives. We want people thinking about, what am I doing in Christ's name in my community, in my family, in this season? This gives us a way to start thinking about that. And collectively, we think that if we had 25,000 compassionate acts, whether that is giving a bicycle to a person next door, donating $50 million to a great organization, winning the lotto. Did anybody win that last night? Not I. So this is just a way of encouraging us to say we're mindful that the end goal is not a lump sum given and that we're just paying to have goodness happen. We're trying to form ourselves and encourage all of our people to be invested as Christ's hands and feet in the world. That's what's behind that. Now, what we need to work on is metrics and ways to capture that. So we are working on that as we construct our website, that we can have some ways of not only capturing those acts of compassion, but then telling those stories. Because what comes out of those stories is encouragement. It's ideas for us to think about where our passions are, where the opportunities are to be Christ's hands and feet. Enough said. I talked a little bit about this. I want to talk more specifically what kind of time we got. Oh, we're good. How are we doing? Are you still with me? Do we need to get up and stretch? Do we need to run any drills for this? Yeah. Okay. So, I want to just give you some ideas about how our staff is thinking currently and our leadership is thinking about how we might step into these goals. Because eventually that vision has to have the metrics and the meat on it and the volunteer power to make that happen. And so what we're thinking about when we talk is to develop that clear path of next steps. Being able to name and articulate what next steps could look like so that we can not only track them, but again, get people thinking about what next steps could be. Inviting people to take their next steps at every worship activity, every event. So here's what happens. I've been out of the game a while. You go on a nice date, and it's wonderful. And then the date ends, you pay the bill, and that's it, right? No, you ask for a follow-up date, right? You ask for a number. We need to make sure that when we are doing things together, that because of active transformation and the opportunity to take a next step. So you're going to hear that. You'll hear that a lot, we hope, in what comes out. We hope that you'll encourage each other to what's the next step. So a next step, for example, is, well, I'll get to it later. A little teaser there. And then we want to, have other people, again, share the stories of what it's meant. Because when people can share those stories, and when we're a story-centered people, the gospel, right? The witness helps us inspire others to take that next step more deeply towards a Christ-led life. This is the family's flourish. We know we need to provide parents tools and practical strategies to pass along their faith to their children. We know, some of you know how hard parenting can be. I can attest to that right now. See, what Isaiah didn't know is that we had an extra hour of sleep last night. So, if you see that my eyes are bloodshot, it's because he didn't get the memo. And I will say at the place of vulnerability, interestingly enough, how one child can bring back some of those, marital conflicts and things that we thought we had buried. They just reemerge. Families, gone are the days, really, but all for the wealthiest of my generation, where we're not working both full-time jobs and trying to make the ends meet and to care for the kids. It's a very stressful season to be doing that. Always is, but we can name that, claim that, and walk alongside. So these marriages and these relationships, even friendships, don't fall apart because of the way that the world pulls at us. So we want to be mindful, offer those tools within our children's and youth programming. For metrics, what that looks like right now, we've hired a consulting group, ArtSpeak Creative, that's going to be doing a 6-month consulting and coaching job with myself, with Darlene Martinez, our children's pastor, and Colt Stubblefield, our youth director, to reimagine and refresh our programming, to get very intentional about how that programming helps teach these things to our children and our youth, and to ask those questions about not only is it children and youth ministries, but family ministries. How are we equipping the parents to do this work alongside their kids? I hope as we get more clarity around that might be something that you all would take interest in volunteering about. So often it's easy to isolate those programs to those who are in the thick of it right now. But the truth is, you all have some experience with this and coming from a different vantage point that can be really helpful to us young families. I've been thankful for the ways you've come alongside me and Jody throughout the years, and so I hope you can do the same for others. For our life groups, we know we have to train those life group leaders. We want to launch those life groups every 6 months at a minimum. And again, to share the stories of what impact is happening, as you all can identify when you've been a part of a group that begins to know each other, to find some vulnerability together, and to do this faith thing together. And what I want to say about this is that you have an opportunity to get a ticket to a Thanksgiving dinner. I hope you will. The tickets are out here. More than the ticket sale, we just really need to know that you're going to show, so please let us know. And you want to be there because we've been looking for a discipleship pastor, a full-time associate pastor to come alongside David and myself for a discipleship role. That's this formation of life groups, the supporting and training of those, for thinking about how outreach and those acts of compassion gets dispersed into those cells of our community, and to help us coordinate our care the way that Bob has already invested in. And that search team has found and identified a wonderful candidate who was here this weekend, and they gave their stamp of approval, and we want to be able to put that name before you all for congregational vote on Thanksgiving dinner. So come, hear who this wonderful person is that may be able to join us, and we hope that you will be able to affirm what we see in terms of a good fit for our community. So again, we're trying to put the resources behind this vision and be very clear that what we do in worship, our facilities have to facilitate ministry, our administration, our governance, all that supports this vision. Because if we, as you know, have this vision or this idea of what our defense is going to do, but we're still set up for this defensive scheme, that's no good. This has been a season, and again, thanks for your patience as we begin to develop the systems behind the scenes, including a staffing structure that will help undergird and facilitate this. Okay, finally, right? Sort of finally. 300 people equipped to share faith. I'm going to move on. 25,000 compassion acts. We had to have those systems to track it. We want to tell those stories. I want to highlight here, Hank Leonard's not here, but part of this $250,000 annually given would come from an endowment that we want to start for outreach. And so we've already started that. Thank you again for those of you who have entertained the idea of that and the generosity already, to begin to grow an endowment that would help provide a portion of these gifts, not for the sake of paying staff, but for the sake of moving mission and ministry in our community and beyond. So that's the intention of that endowment. Finally, core practices. Now here's the deal. There's a lot of different ways to be faithful to Christ's call. It's an individual thing because God's given us all individual gifts and graces. But as a young family who's come in, here's the story. Dad goes in to tuck in his child, and his 6-year-old says, right after the lights go out, "Dad, yes, is God real?" Now, Dad has an instant panic. Dad grew up in the church. So did Mom. Everybody did in Tulsa, okay? Everybody has a church background. But somewhere along the way, maybe they just got distracted or full, and now this question's come up. And there's this light bulb that happened. Maybe we should get back in church, have a little support for this, give them that baseline about faith that we've cherished and carried with us, even though we haven't been active participants in the life of a congregation. And so here they come, Mike and Jennifer, through the doors Sunday morning at Harvard Avenue Christian Church. Starting from that point, what kind of intentional structures and things do we have to welcome them, offer them opportunities to know about what we're about, offer them a next step, let them have the tools and equipment to give their children that faith base that they desire for them to have. So we're starting to think very intentionally about that, and we're thinking very intentionally about, well, you all say to live and love like Jesus. Well, what's it look like? Well, it could look like a lot of different things. But let's give you a snapshot of what mature discipleship might look like. Some very fundamental baseline, they're not exceptional to this congregation, things that we see in the scriptures of what it might look like to live and love like Jesus. And with that said, you get these 8 marks of discipleship. We think that a mature disciple has some kind of daily prayer life. That may look very different, but there's always a way to take a next step in our prayer life. Worship weekly. Not only worship weekly, but I believe on yours it says worship together weekly. There's a difference in, our worship alone as I walk in nature and being together as the body of Christ. We want to encourage that. To read the Bible regularly, we know that Scripture is one of the primary sources of revelation of God's good news for this world, and we want to encourage people and train people how to do that if that's not already a practice. Living life together, you all are doing it here. We want that for those where we're setting up life groups, etc. To give generously, to serve compassionately, to share that faith, right, as a witness. And we could have done away with this one. But Lord knows that people my age, this may be the biggest one. To honor some Sabbath time. To put down the phone. To focus on an opportunity, say on a Sunday afternoon or a Monday night, to just be fully present to Jody and Isaiah and celebrate what God is doing in our lives. It's a big deal. And I think it's a growing point for all of us. But we really want that to be a part of what people understand mature discipleship to look like. So again, that can look like a lot of different things. But we think that we've given people a snapshot of what this could look like and what we can lean into. So, we have a few more minutes. One more part of our game plan. You still with me? All right. If you're happy, glad. No, Isaiah's paying attention. So, Mike and Jennifer come in the door. They're coming in the door Sunday morning. We know that Sunday morning is a primary point of entry. Now we're talking technical terms. A primary point of entry for people who are new, which means this. On a Sunday morning, you will hear things that you already know, but that people coming in for the first time will not. And what we say in worship and how we act on Sunday morning, that there will be people behind the information desk, greeters at the doors that reflect not only those of you willing, but young families as well. All of this is explicitly for the sake of naming that this is a primary entry point. We want to make sure to own that. The other primary entry points we know are our online content. Well, you know what? I've been watching you, Pastor David, for the last 5 years. And we're here now. We know that people are checking out our presence online. That was a gift of that came out of the dark times of pandemic. And so our online content, what we put out there, not only that, but curriculum that we'll produce and stuff, that's a primary entry point. We have to speak in such a way that it's not insider. The other thing is we know people are getting connected to groups. Not just pickleball, but we have a couple of life groups. You heard from Ryan and Mandy Fair about giving and why that's important and the impact of the church. They have a life group of 14 people, and every one of those young families is new to this congregation. And so they, people who are not all in the church, they still have friends and connectivity outside of the church. And so that's a primary place of growth. So I'm just going to say community groups here. So we're very specific about where our primary points of entry are and why we use the language we use and why we set things up the way we do there. But what's the next step? May I have your number, right? It's the date night. It moves us somewhere. Where does that move us? Do you hear it? Hey, every second Tuesday of the month, you can meet me right over here. This is David. right here. And for Discover Harvard Avenue, we'll have cake. Some of you, have any of you been to Discover Harvard Avenue? Okay, yes. So an opportunity to come hear more about us in an intimate setting. You can ask those questions. Those questions look very different for people who are churched than the people who aren't churched. And we're now aware of that and paying attention to that. Discover Harvard Avenue, great. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, we're working on that. We know that there's a lot that happens from the point in the scriptures that Jesus says, come and follow me, to come and die for me, right? To pick up your cross. A lot happens there. And we need to be aware that people don't just come to worship and then our elders in our community or come to worship and instantly know how to get plugged in. So we're being very intentional at asking the questions about what those next steps look like. We're in the process of looking into how we can develop a next steps class where people can hear more about the core values, the core practices, and hear about some opportunities to live those out in our community. So that's an exciting piece that's in process. So that's a next steps class. Finally, we have things that we know are already existing. We've got the Challengers class. We have those life groups. We have our Children's and Family Ministries programming. And all of these things have a specific goal in mind. Do you know what it is? Those core practices to encourage people to take a next step. Now we're getting very specific about what our activities and our programmings are trying to accomplish. Okay, so now let's say you're a part of these groups and you're doing that work. You're hooked. You're in. You're wanting to live and love like Jesus. Great. Now, what do I do? Well, keep doing it because we're not all there yet. Please take a humble approach. But for those of you who are here and you're further along, don't forget, and we won't forget to make sure to tell you in the season ahead, how you can come back. We have to have people who are willing to come back and understand that this is the starting point for our young families. And to be a part of information desks and door greeters and providing cookies and punch and working people through a next steps class and hosting these life groups and community groups. So again, this is more of like our big picture game plan for those like being on planes and looking down. That's what I've got for you. And the reminder that you all are already living this out, that our staff has done an exceptional amount of work. We've asked staff who have been here for a very long time to move from safety to tight end, to shift what it is and reimagine their role in our staff to help support this vision. We've asked you all to do a lot of lifting and a lot of change. And I name that there's stuff to grieve there. I really do. And that it is not an easy task. Not for our staff, not for you all as people who have been a firm part of this church. But I really do believe that with God's help, we are living into this, that we're creating the structures that help support all of this, and that in due time, that we will be a body that can live out this vision, and I will have a beautiful impact here in Tulsa, in this congregation, in the world at large. So if you have questions about this, David and I are open. We want to answer those questions because clarity is kindness. We want to be clear about what your role can be so that you can join us on the field. Cool. Thank you for your time.